Good morning, everyone. I think we are in a very interesting part of today's discussion because it might mean a lot to Bangalore in the next 10 to 20 years. Before I start, I would just want you to think. Imagine there is another outer ring road outside the current ring road. And just like how the current outer ring road has industries, businesses that support the global IT industry, we have the outer ring road, the next outer ring road doing semiconductor design for the world, other kinds of high technology industries where Bangalore is actually servicing the rest of the world. It might mean horrible things for our traffic, but I think it means fantastic things for our economic growth, prosperity, and especially for the young people sitting out here, great jobs and great livelihoods. Now, such a future is actually possible given the situation today. Now, today we are going to talk about supply chains. I just want you to hold that vision in mind when you have this conversation. What does it mean for Bangalore, right? So, I have three great panelists here, and we're going to talk about how this vision of shifting of the world's industrial base, the world's industrial supply chains in various dimensions can happen, and how Karnataka and Bangalore can take advantage of it. Now, unlike what we've put on the theme of the event, saying that India is the epicenter of this supply chain movement, I think India has that opportunity. And the opportunity is not the same as having actually grabbed that opportunity. So there's a long way for us to go to grab that opportunity, and the dignitaries, the officials, and the people here, I think the common message for us to take back after this session is how do we make this opportunity a reality such that it changes our lives and prosperity for the state and for the country. So let me start with Hans Paul, who as a top executive at BCG was responsible for making the globalization of the last 30 years happen and such a powerful force for prosperity for the rest of the world, and also for its concentration in a few parts of the world. So can I just ask you to tell us the story of how we got here? How is it that supply chains got concentrated in a few places in the last 25 to 30 years? And then what is it that caused this movement towards de-risking and trying to move the supply chains from where they are now to a broader base?
Well, I would say, actually, we're not so concentrated, even though it looks like that everything is in China. But, you know, with the opening up of the economies beyond Europe, North America, and Japan, you know, the formerly communist countries open up the late 80s. India opened up in the early 90s. But also countries in Southeast Asia, you know, Vietnam, Indonesia joined the group of open economies. We've seen really enormous spread of economic activity across the world. And even, of course, the Middle East, you know, some countries in Africa and certainly Latin America have benefited, Mexico in particular. The key really is to be part of the world, really producing lots of products and services and contributing to that, and therefore also providing lots of opportunities for people as workers, as entrepreneurs around the world, but also making better, you know, providing better products and services, and also cheaper products and services for consumers around the world. So I think it has been enormous benefit for everybody around the world, making sure that hundreds of millions of people have moved out of poverty and really become a part of the, or member of the global world economy as an active member. And I think, of course, when you look at the situation in India, say, you know, why are we not at the center of this? I think in some parts, you know, India has really played a very important role. I mean, you mentioned IT services, the minister also mentioned IT services, where India has been a core place, but not yet in manufacturing because of the obstacles that people and investors, both domestic and foreign investors, have really met here in India. So whereas other countries like China, but also Vietnam and others, Mexico, have been very open to that kind of investment. And I think, the question is not why are we not, because why have we not provided the opportunities?
Thanks. I want to go to Bill. Bill, you were with General Electric, you were saying you were General Electric and now with Lockheed. And if I were to look at you as a representative of American business, why is it that the United States for the last 25 to 30 years did not recognize that massive amounts of high technology investments in China is going to be a geopolitical problem? Why is it that it took, from 1979 to maybe 2016, why did it take that long for the United States to realize that concentrating supply chains is a challenge, it's a geopolitical challenge, it's not just a business challenge?
Well, I think I'll just follow on my colleagues' prior comments. I was going to say that it's more about, going forward, diversification, right? When we look at our workforce, we know we have a stronger and more resilient workforce when we diversify. And the same is true in our supply chains. We need strong, resilient supply chains through diversification. So although I'm from the US, I've spent most of my life since over the last 30 years working internationally. And I see the world differently from what you just described it. I see the world where US companies, European companies, Asian companies are seeking to establish presence in places that maybe felt foreign to them. Look at how Japan automotive companies have moved into India. Look at our presence in India for over 40 years and establishing partners with companies like Tata. Tata Lockheed Martin, Tata Sikorsky. We did that out of an opportunity because we saw centers of innovation and efficiency here in India, just as we did elsewhere in the world. But I think what has COVID taught us, and what has the recent geopolitical scenario taught us, we need to work together with like-minded nations and establish those resilient relationships built on trust and performance. And I think Karnataka here in this state with Bangalore has proven that as a center of innovation for most of the most advanced companies that we work with in the US and Europe and the rest of Asia. And I think that's the future.
Thanks. JC, if I were to come to you, nothing exemplifies concentration of an industry in few geographies as your industry. Semiconductors, like TSMC, South Korea and Japan. If you look at these three places, they probably constitute lion's share of the production of semiconductors around the world, if you include China. Now, can you share with us how did this happen? Why did the semiconductor industry concentrate in that part of the world? Although the technology came from the United States. From the beginning, the technology has always been from the United States and Europe. Why did manufacturing concentrate in that part of the world?
Yeah, first of all, good morning, everyone, and thanks for this opportunity. I will answer it in a little bit differently. What is actually now transpiring? It may have happened for maybe the cost reasons. It may have happened because everybody was trying to get the best product and through a concentrated effort and so on. But if you really look at it, there are few trends that are going on that I think right now we should pay attention to versus what may have transpired in the past. And few of them, I think they are very obvious, but I will just simplify it for all of us. One is, I think the demand for the electronics and the semiconductors continues to rise, and it is driven by a lot of technology that is required for automation, for consumer electronics, for the new technologies that are pushing it, like the 5Gs and AIs and so on and so forth. I think that trend which started maybe 5-7 years back will continue. You can always say, yeah, there is a little bit of a slowdown that is happening, but that is cyclic. It happens in this industry all the time. So the trend of more and more semiconductor requirement and electronics requirement, I think would continue to happen for us to be a better society in the future. The number two, I think, is the geopolitical, pressures that are coming up, or what is happening from different countries, the trade war, you can call it, or little bit of a disruption that is happening with some of the war situation, which is disrupting our, overall supply chain. But what is happening there is people are starting to rebalance that as far as supply chain of semiconductor industry is concerned and the manufacturing in the semiconductor industry is concerned. So what you would look 10 years from now, I think you would have a different balance than you see today that has transpired over the last 10 years. Third thing, very important, this is a very complex, technologically advanced industry, the semiconductor world. And there is a lot of new technological advancements are coming in, which will define the future of how the manufacturing, how the connectivity, and what chemicals and the materials will be used in this industry in the future. So that advancement is happening. You might have heard of silicon photonics, the gallium nitride fabs, and so on and so forth. So those are the technological advancements that are happening. And the last one I would say, if you look at the overall semiconductor industry, there is a skill requirement that is lagging behind what is required in this industry. And the skills is not only in the manufacturing space, but also in the design space, the system engineering space, and also in the manufacturing space, the technicians that are required, the researchers that are required for semiconductor manufacturing. So if you really look at these 4 trends, I think what we should look at if we are in Karnataka or India, we should look at what do we need to prepare for to meet the needs or to really comply with the trends that are happening in this industry.
Okay, I'll stop you there. We'll come to the to-dos in the next round. But I have a question for all 3 of you. You could take this in series, right? The last few years, we had 3 big shocks. The US-China tech war, the trade war, COVID-19, and now the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, all 3 shocks point towards the same thing as far as supply chains are concerned. Right, you need to diversify. Bill, as you said, you need to diversify. Can I ask each of you to share your thoughts on your learnings, impressions, insights from being through these 3 shocks? And what does it mean for supply chains in general or in your industry?
Well, yeah, I think indeed, as Bill has said, diversification is the name of the game. But it's not just because of the 3 last events that you mentioned. There was the volcano eruption on Iceland. There was Fukushima. There was a flooding in Bangkok. There was the blockage of the Suez Canal. And every time, of course, we had significant disruptions for one industry or the other in a massive way. And every time we did talk with our clients about hedging, really diversifying, risks and making sure that at least in each part of the world, Asia, Europe, North America, you have to have a factory, you have to have 2 or 3 suppliers. Strikes in the past also have been, a major disruption. And every time people went actually back and says, it's more efficient, to source from one place. I think this time it probably is for real because the damage, the potential damage and the potential tensions are so that people really take it seriously. And this time I think we will have, make these efforts to have not just global supply chains, but also regional, local supply chains, nearshoring. Not everything will go back to the US, but it could be Mexico. In Europe, it could go to Central Europe, to North Africa. And in Asia, you have Southeast Asia and potentially India as alternatives to China. That's underway, and it will be really important, I think, because the shocks have been really deep.
So you want to take a shot?
Yeah, of course, the COVID was the biggest hit, right, that we saw in our personal lives, in our businesses, and so on. But there was many other disruptions that, were pointed out here. So, first of all, I think none of us were prepared for what was coming. I think we all reacted. And so some of the learnings that you're asking, what I can speak from, my company perspective is, I think one of the learnings was, the things that were seen from Global Foundries perspective, we are into, we have a manufacturing footprint which is global. And this manufacturing, we do manufacturing solutions in US, Germany, Singapore, and very recently in France. So if you look at that footprint that we have, that actually became positive for us, although it was a high-cost geo footprint, because that allowed us to continue with with less disruptions. Of course, there were disruptions as compared to people who had most of their engagements in one part of the world, right? So for us, I think because of the diversity that we have in our manufacturing footprint, we had a very resilient and reliable supply chain that we were able to lead with some of the disruptions. And I think going forward, that will still be the same for us, so that we do not get bogged by one area or one region. So that is number one learnings, that even if it is a little bit costly, I think that helps as far as running the tide when you are in a tough situation. The second one, I would say the learnings from Global Foundries is we kept our strategy on innovation intact during these disruptions. There were a lot of new technological innovations that were brought in that our customers benefited from, and that allowed the world to run while we were going through these disruptions. The second one, I would say the learning was we kept making the technology investments in this area, because we knew these technology investments should not be stopped because of these disruptions. So in examples of those were investing in a new fab in Singapore, for example, making an investment in France during this tough times, to an extent that our company went IPO during the tough COVID environment. Just last year, in 2021, October, we went IPO, and two of the biggest IPOs of 2021, or the most important IPOs. So I think the learnings were, how you keep the investments in the technology space, the innovation keep going, and at the same time, take advantage of the global footprint that you have built.
I think I'll lead off. The COVID pandemic and what we learned through that. I was here in India through the entire time mostly, and we were and continue to produce the tail of the C-130J in Hyderabad through our joint venture with Tata. And we actually had many products, many of these deliveries going through Mumbai ports to get to the US, to get integrated into a complete aircraft. We had a lockdown for 3 months where we couldn't continue to produce, but we had requirements. You had some countries, such as in the US, that had defense and security as one of the carve-outs, like health and services, to allow people to continue to their production. And what I thought, what we did learn was we had to find new ways to engage governments, public-private partnerships. In the small example that I used, how could we continue to deliver our product to meet a requirement and an urgent need? We never missed one delivery, and we met our deliveries through the COVID timeframe. And that's because we could work with states and the central government to make that happen. Look at the vaccine production, or look at the PPE production. There were companies that weren't producing, but they produced it out of necessity to meet an urgent need, and they did that through collaboration. And I think that was so true. I think we created a level of resilience through that is helping us now going forward as we face other challenges in the supply chain. And the other thing we learned we had to do was we have tens of thousands of suppliers. We had to ensure that we sustained our supply chain in terms of placing orders, making payments. People had to keep their workforce in place without knowing how long the COVID pandemic would last. How long would we continue to work remotely? How are we going to adapt our workforce in a way that we can continue to meet, in our case, defense and aerospace urgent needs, but urgent needs across all sectors? And then how do we work remotely and actually with speed, simplicity, and self-confidence going forward to actually come out stronger and more efficient and more effective? And so I think we learned a lot in terms of how we can be more efficient. And we also learned, I think, what I mentioned earlier, the strength of diversification. Here in India, we have a Self-Reliant India initiative that grew out of the early days of the pandemic. And it's really about, for us as a company, working with local partners at the large, small MSMEs, and even incubating startups to meet India's needs, connect into our global supply chain so that as and when the Indian requirements come up in the defense domain, we're going to be able to deliver with local partners and bring our best capabilities from around the world, but integrate here to deliver a fighter aircraft or a helicopter. And so I think the last few years is accelerating that transformation out of necessity and shared need.
Thanks, Will. Now let's move to another thing where I'm going to put you guys in a spot, right? Because I think if we accept, as we all do, that the shifting of the world supply chains in various dimensions is an opportunity for a country like India, and for Karnataka, what would be the strengths that you see in the Indian economy in Karnataka? And what would be your wish lists? What are the things we need to do to be able to gain that opportunity, right? That's one part of the question. The second part of the question is, to what extent do you think the drive towards self-reliance, make in India, indigenous production is helpful in this whole business of enjoying the benefits of supply chain movements? I'll start with you.
Yeah. So I think in order to attract more business, both domestic and foreign investors to India, I think people, of course, look for talent, not just engineers and scientists, but also, of course, electricians, skilled laborers. And I think there is a good flow in India, but a lot more can and should be done. So education needs to be better, vocational training can be better, and of course the number of students from science engineering has to further increase going forward. So but I think there is a good base there. What I think is a challenge is land in order to build factories. Some states are doing a good job, other states have a tougher time, and getting land is not easy. Having the infrastructure, physical and digital infrastructure, is a challenge, and a lot more needs to be done. And then I think we need better institutions, government services, agencies. I mean, everybody talks about one-stop shopping, but then you still have to deal with a multitude of agencies and institutions, they can make life very difficult for you until you have the necessary permissions. And in many states, lots of MOUs are being signed every year, and only a very small portion is actually being realized. And so I think it's very important to use the opportunities to make this work. The interest is certainly there. India, besides Southeast Asia, is the other big opportunity for having alternative production besides China. And I think the opportunities there, just need to grasp it and really provide also the conditions to make it work. So as I said, people, physical infrastructure, institutions, rule of law, so that you can rely on what is being agreed on. Now, I would not, going to your second part, I would not overly emphasize this self-reliance. I mean, Europe, North America, Japan, none of us is, self-reliant, and trying that would be massively uneconomically. So we need to really work together across the world. But I think there are opportunities to really have a strong base here in India, not just for India, but for the rest of the world, and to export a lot of stuff. So I would de-emphasize the point of self-reliance, and I would emphasize the point of really providing opportunities for the rest of the world, because we all have to remain open economies. The moment you close down, you will certainly suffer, and I think growth will be really much slower. Look at Latin America. They have never moved much beyond import substitution, except for Mexico, and it has meant, staying a commodity play. and having relatively low rates of growth.
Bill, can you come in next?
Sure. I think one of the big strengths here is that here we're sitting in the center of innovation and the center of creativity of so many world-class companies, as well as world-class companies that have grown up here in India. We're in the fastest growing startup ecosystem, I feel, and you can feel the energy that comes with that. And there's a tremendous amount of innovation and creativity that's coming. I think that's a tremendous advantage. How you harness that and adapt it and bring it to market most effectively and most quickly, both to meet India's needs as well as the global needs, with I will say, for instance, an example, production-linked incentives has been a real accelerator, I would say, in a way of public-private partnership to bring the investment that you've seen elsewhere in the world as a catalyst for companies that can actually grow and meet India's needs and actually grow our exports. I think that's a great example across sectors that we're seeing here today in India. When we think of self-reliant India, I think we also have to think about bringing the best capabilities and integrating here. And so in different sectors, it's defined differently. But I think what's important is, for us at least in the defense domain, is to work with partners, integrate the best capabilities from around the world, developing those capabilities and partnering with companies here in India, delivering to meet India's requirements. But if it's a world-class solution to meet and pace the threats or the challenge, the demands that are needed, then it's also going to be a solution that we can export from India as well. And so I think that with the government incentives, both at the center and state level, the level of innovation and human capital, and I'll say creativity, we call it Jugaad here in India, right? It's what we say elsewhere is make it happen. And I think people have a personal drive and interest and capability to make things happen. And I think that's our future.
Yeah, so I'll try to be short, but the strengths, some of them are already talked. I think the strength we see in Karnataka, one of the ones I would like to mention is the collaboration that we can have with the government and the industry-government collaboration and the approachability we can have with the government, even advising them on some of the policy decisions that are most important for the industry. I think that is definitely one of the strengths, and we should continue on that. The second one from our industry, semiconductor industry, the design and is the skill availability in the state and some of the research institutions or technology institutions that are available in the state, I think are of very high value add. The third one, I would say from Global Foundries perspective, we have a lot of our partners and the people we worked at the global level have a presence in the local ecosystem. And that allows us to work closely with them and really develop solutions that our customers require. And the last one, I would say, the overall fabless ecosystem that is developing very fast, the startup ecosystem here, we would definitely want the process technology of Global Foundries to be exposed to them so that they can really nurture their businesses in the future. So those are some of the strengths. I think on the self-reliance one, I would say we should look at, yes, self-reliance is okay. We should try to, take some enthusiasm built around it. But I think the lens we should look at it is from semiconductor perspective, what is the contribution of India in the overall semiconductor ecosystem? Are we increasing that contribution so that we have a play on the table when we are discussing and we are not being hosed when there is a requirement that we need and we cannot get the semiconductors from outside. So we should not be in a place where the national security is in danger. So our contribution in the semiconductor ecosystem, how do we increase that, I think should be one of our priorities rather than total self-reliance.
Can I just add one thing? I mean, what I think makes us all very optimistic and why we at BCG are also very optimistic about India is the people. That is the biggest asset, as entrepreneurs, as scientists, as engineers, as workers. There is an enormous talent here, and it's just not Indians, not just here in India, but all over the world. And I think if this potential is unleashed, if India is open enough, if we can really make it work, and India will become a major center for production, but also for providing services, as it already is in IT around the world. And I think, unleashing that potential is, I think, the most important thing, because the capabilities, the talent is here.
I think there's no better way to end this panel than on those words. We shouldn't try and improve on perfect or near perfect comments. So I'd like to end this session here, catch up on time, and wish the panel, thank the panel for being so generous with their time and being candid with their remarks. And thank you all for listening.